Discerning Hearts provides content dedicated to those on the spiritual journey. To continue production of these videos, prayers, and more, go to discerninghearts.com and click the donate link found there or inside the free Discerning Hearts app to make your donation. Thanks, and God bless.
DiscerningHearts.com presents a special In Conversation with Father Vincent Twomey, who's the former doctoral student and longtime friend of Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. Father Twomey is a professor emeritus of theology at St. Patrick's Pontifical University, Maynooth, Ireland. We now begin our conversation with Father Twomey. I'm your host, Kris McGregor. Father Twomey, thank you so much once again for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join you on this very historic day.
It is a historic day. It's a day that Joseph Ratzinger was waiting for, wasn't it? He was anticipating this time, wasn't he?
Well, you know what they talk about, the death of the day, a saint death, the anniversary of his death. It's a dies natalis, a birth, a birthday into heaven. So I think that's the case with my good friend Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict. Yeah, I've been rather upset since I heard the news he was dying. I knew he would be dying. When I saw him, I told you the last time. When I saw him the last time in Rome, in his monastery, and had this wonderful conversation with him, longer than I had expected, or even anyone had expected. And then, of course, he was very weak. But still, we had a better conversation than the last year, when presumably he was a bit better. So, but I could see, he wouldn't have too long to last. But I didn't expect it would come so quickly. That really was, then Wednesday I heard the news that he was dying. That's the first news that Pope Francis had announced. He was very ill. And then, since then, I've been in mourning practically, so can't be helped. I know he's gone to heaven. Somebody wrote to me, he'd have a royal reception in heaven, which I think will be true. So I've all kinds of memories coming to me during the day. I was writing various things to various people, articles and things like that. And, the wonderful privilege it was for me to have known this man, I said to him once, it was providential that I actually came to see you. I never intended originally to study under Ratzinger when I went to Germany for my postgraduate degrees. And it was rather complicated, but eventually it was a conversation with a former professor of mine in Maynooth, who advised me not to go to Tübingen, where I'd hoped to go, because they had a very young, promising theologian at the Maynooth Summer School conference during the summer in 1969, and he had to get out of Tübingen because of the tension on the faculty. He couldn't do his academic work, and he went to this new university in Regensburg, in a bit of a backwater. Tübingen was the great theological center for centuries. Tübingen was a new university, and even though it had a connection with Albert the Great, for a while he was Bishop of Regensburg, and the theology faculty was actually situated in the old Dominican monastery where Albert the Great himself would have taught. That was wonderful initially. Then they moved into this awful modern university on the outskirts. But he had said, now I'm finished my movement. He was in Bonn, a university in Bonn, in Münster, in Tübingen, and now in Regensburg. Before that, he was in Munich, in Freising.
Okay.
He moved from Tübingen to Regensburg, from this famous theology faculty to this new faculty, effectively, which had a connection. The Regensburg itself had a connection with the great teacher of Thomas Aquinas, Albert the Great. And the theology faculty for a while was situated in the actual Dominican convent, where Albert the Great taught for a while, which was really marvelous. So we were there in that tradition. But then we moved out into this awful modern building on the outskirts of Regensburg. And he had his house nearby in a little parish outside the city. And he had reinterred his parents' remains from where they previously were buried, Traunstein, I think, to Pentling, this parish, so that he could visit his parents' graves every Sunday when he went to Mass, or every time he went to say Mass there. His sister was there, his secretary, and Georg, his brother. So everything was ready for him to start his life work. For him, the great objective of any great theologian of his stature was to write a systematic account of the whole of dogmatic theology, so-called dogmatics. Yeah? And he was there surrounded by his doctoral students, at least 25 every year, postdoctoral students, visiting scholars from all over the world. And he was ready to really get down to work on a serious theological endeavor. And then he was called to take on the responsibility as Archbishop of Freising and Munich and Freising. And that really was quite a sacrifice for him, you know. So he never really got to write that huge work. What he did write covers 16 volumes in German. And some of those volumes, they range from 700 pages to 1,400 pages or thereabouts. You know, it's quite extraordinary. But they're all mostly casual, you know, not casual works that were occasioned, mostly articles really, occasioned by various controversies, etc., and talks he gave, etc. So he did leave an extraordinary legacy, I would say, and in years to come, that's what he will be most remembered for. It is really very, very encouraging to see how young theologians, in particular, are discovering him as a source of inspiration. He never, as I said, created this huge systematic account of theology. What he did was he set seeds. He gave indications of where to go, where to start, what direction to take your thinking. And that, I think, is the greatness of the man. He never stopped thinking, he never stopped reading, he never stopped writing. Even as when he took over as Archbishop in Munich, and then Cardinal Prefect in Rome, and as Pope, even as a retired Pope, he was always reading, writing, and communicating his thought to the world. So he remained a theologian, and he only took on the job as Cardinal Prefect once he got the assurance from Pope John Paul II that he would be allowed to publish as a private theologian. He did that right up to the end of his life. And that, of course, is what he will be remembered for. Among the great, of course, things he has left to the church and to humanity is his trilogy on Jesus of Nazareth. And every spare moment he got as Pope, he devoted to that. Because he, as he said once to us, the real problem in the church, there are many problems in moral theology, in dogmatic theology. The real problem really is in the scriptural interpretation of who Jesus of Nazareth is. And that if we don't get that right, we get nothing right. So his whole endeavor was to actually transform, to uncover the scriptures, which were so dear to his heart, that actually the person of Jesus Christ in his full humanity and his full divinity would be evident to generations to come. And that, I think, he has achieved. But that's only one of the many other contributions he has made to theology. So all of these ideas are going through my head as I think back over 52 years of association with the man. First as my Dr. Vater. In Germany, a doctoral supervisor is called a Dr. Vater. Yeah? And he was a father to us, yeah, in so many ways. But a wonderful father. He never interfered. He let us go our way. He gave us the freedom to research, to think. Am I saying too much?
No, not at all. This is actually gold. So I just appreciate everything you're saying.
But just to go back to, I mean, to say my first memories of him as a professor, two big memories, many, but two major. One was in his lectures. He had an extraordinary way of delivering lectures. First of all, his lectures at the beginning of each semester, when he took up a new topic, creation, evolution, for example, or the church's structure, or Mariology, whatever it was, he would give a tour de horizon, a whole discussion of how these questions were being treated in the world today. Take, for example, science, creation, the whole question of evolution, what science was saying, what philosophers were saying, what theologians were saying. And these initial lectures attracted people, scholars, both professors and students from every discipline on the university, because they were so marvelous. His grasp of literature, of history, of philosophy, and of theology and science was quite incredible. And all delivered with an ease, just flowed out of him. And the trouble is, when you're trying to take notes, one idea flowed into the other. It's so hard to actually summarize it, because you say, well, that's idea, it just simply led to another. So that was the one thing. His lectures were quite stunning. The other thing was the way he conducted his seminars and colloquium, doctoral colloquium. I think I may have mentioned that in the last time, did I? That he had this kind of capacity to allow every student, everyone who participated in a seminar, to express themselves, to actually look for the truth in their own way. And he would, forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I remember, he would kind of start off, a student would read a paper, then he'd open that for discussion. And after about 20 minutes or half an hour, he would summarize the discussion in a few minutes, all the main points, and say, Herr Schmidt, so-and-so, Herr Joe Smith, he made a point that nobody picked up, and it's a very important point. It's an objection that nobody really looked at. And then he would say what Herr Schmidt tried to say. Herr Schmidt would glow. That's what I was trying to say. In other words, he could grasp what you were trying to say. Even a neophyte, even somebody who's a beginner, he could actually grasp what he was trying to say. And then he'd say, now the implications of this point are A, B, and C. Let's discuss that. And then the discussion would take off. And then when the hour and a half was over, irrespective of what stage the discussion had come to, said, sorry, thank you very much. Now we'll meet again next week. Yeah. He would never try to summarize. He'd never try to correct anyone. That's the discussion. And so when the seminar was over, or colloquium, he went on then to discuss it the discussion went on beyond the actual auditorium or the seminar room or the doctoral colloquium. So they're part of the memories that are kind of flowing through my mind at the moment. Yeah. And then, of course, when he was called to be Archbishop of Munich and Freising, I remember how disappointed we all were, his students, And I had occasion to go to his house in Pentling to do something for him, bring him somewhere, I think. And I said, Professor Ratzinger, why did you take on that job? You're a loss to academia. And he pointed to a letter on the table on his desk, and he said, well, if the Pope writes you a personal letter, you can't refuse. And then, of course, he was getting into his job in Munich after a very difficult start. He replaced a cardinal archbishop, Cardinal Dupfner, who had completely different ideas to what he had. And so he had quite a struggle to establish himself initially but then he was getting into it. I think Pope Paul VI asked him then, one of the popes asked him to, Paul VI, I think, asked him to take on a job in Rome. He said, no, I can't, in education. And then eventually John Paul II persuaded him to take it on. And with great reluctance, he had to do it, And then he went to Rome. So he gave up the wonderful job he was doing as Archbishop, trying to sort out a diocese of over almost 2 million, I think, with the huge problems, of course, as well. And then he went to Rome, and then he was doing a job that really was not in his nature to do. As I said, his discussions were always free and open, and he respected everybody's views, and he taught us to respect any views, no matter where they came from. Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, atheist, doesn't matter, Buddhist or Hindu, or any scintilla of truth has to be respected and as something that also comes from God. But as prefect, cardinal prefect of the Doctrine of the Faith, he had to discipline various colleagues. This really went against the grain, I think. He had to also point out, the errors in certain theologians' views, because these errors would affect people's salvation, nothing less. So, as a theologian, you can debate things in the lecture halls, part of the laboratory of the faith, if you wish. But in the public realm, when these things come into the public realm, they take on a different significance. And if they upset people's faith, and many of the theologies did and do, then they have to be corrected. And so he had to actually, correct various things, various developments in society, in the moral area in particular. And of course, he did it. He probably came across as rather severe, but I think he had to be severe because he was going against the grain to a certain extent. He was attacked greatly. He was known as, God's Rottweiler and the Panzer Cardinal, and et cetera, He knew all of that. He was always being attacked, especially in the German media, but the media throughout the world. And he just simply had to take it as, remember what the Lord said, blessed are you when they persecute you for my sake. That's what you expect, I would also, I was talking to somebody recently about, what my general impression of him over the years. One thing struck me, a number of things struck me. One in particular was, as a young professor, and he was quite a young professor, you see, he was always running here, there, and everywhere. He had lectures, he was going to seminars, he was writing books and writing articles, rather, and giving these wonderful lectures. He was dean of the faculty in the university. He was on various commissions, etc., So he was always kind of hurrying. But once he became Archbishop of Munich, a calm set in. Now, even when he was hurried, he never lost his calm. He never lost his cool. Only once, I think, did he do so when he was falsely attacked by what became one of his favorite students afterwards in a seminar. But anyhow, that's the only time I can remember him actually losing his calm. But his calm increased as he became Archbishop, cardinal prefect, and as Pope. Yeah. Even though his workload increased, his responsibilities increased. So evidently he was carried by another source, which is not human. And because as a human being, as a man, he was always very frail. His health was frail. And he had, I think, 2 strokes. Towards the end of his life, he lost the sight in one eye. I think he might have been slightly deaf in one ear. And yet he continued and never complained. Yeah. And still he always had a smile on his face when he was relaxed. Yeah. He had a lovely sense of humor, sometimes quite mischievous. And he loved to be with people, with his friends. He used to enjoy his former students when we met every year for a colloquium, for a weekend or so, just in the evening to be chatting and talking, have a glass of beer, a glass of wine, and regaling various stories. So there are some of the fond memories I have of him. This is the kind of side of the man that in general the world wouldn't have the opportunity to see or to experience. Yeah. And then on a personal level, he was always ready for any of us to help if we needed help. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when we met before he became Pope, when we met as a Schülerkreis in the summer, usually in Germany, but sometimes a few times, twice in Rome, once in Switzerland, he always had time for anyone who had a request to make of him privately. He always did what he promised. Yeah. And he never forgot anything. He had a stupendous memory, of course. His sister Maria told me once, who was in one of our first meeting in Rome, actually, that Joseph never reads a book twice. And he never forgot a face, never forgot a name. No? And this is, quite remarkable. So it was a great privilege to have known him at all. But as I said to him, actually in a letter, I think it was a providential that for me anyhow. And he said, yes, I think it was providential. It is, everything is under God's providence, of course. That's kind of, doesn't have to be said, I suppose, So,
well,
so that's...
Father, yeah, the thing is, Father, what is so remarkable. Thank you first for sharing some of just a few of the moments and the observations I'm sure that you'll be unpacking for so long. And, the thing about him, as you were describing him, what he ended up becoming for so much of the world in a very real way was a real pastor. Yes. Even though he was an incredible theologian and was able to see things in ways and make connections and contextualize things in ways that left you kind of breathless at moments, those aha moments, those times when I keep going back to the Wednesday audiences where John Paul, he did incredible things while he had his opportunity to do that. And I say this in all reverence and respect to the great saint. I do think that Pope Benedict XVI did a better job at it, because he just so knew how to focus in to teach the world. His audience, his students became the little person in whether it was in South Africa or somewhere in a cottage in England or wherever he knew they would hear this moment. And he would describe Bonaventure in 1 or 2 sessions and open up a door that would encourage everyone, not just someone who is studying, but everyone to get to know that working of the Lord in that person. Does that make sense?
That is beautifully said. That sums up the whole thing. And it's interesting, the people who are saying their condolences to me are a number of so-called ordinary people, or so-called simple faithful. But as he once pointed out in the New Testament, the term for holiness is simplicity. And he had that simplicity himself. And you mentioned the audiences. The people went to see John Paul II. He was a rock star to a certain extent. He was a major figure and greatly loved by Ratzinger when they were working together. They worked very well together, 2 completely different personalities. I remember one of these audiences that I read about, actually, the text where he had an audience of first communicants, children who had made their first communion sometime previously that year, So he had a few of them around him up on the dais, up on the center of Peter Square, and they were asking him questions. And one of the questions was, Holy Father, I've been to confession now a few times, and I'm always saying the same things. Why should I bother going to confession? He said, well, do you have a room in your house? Yes. And do you clean the room? Yes. Well, what would happen if you didn't clean it regularly? The same with your soul. You must clean your soul of the dust that gathers in the weeks. Yeah? That's beautiful.
It is.
And the other then was, Holy Father, I want to go to Mass on Sunday, but my parents sleep out. What should I do about it? He said, well, now your parents are working hard to put you through, to feed you, to clothe you, to put you through school, etc. And they're tired on a Sunday morning, So, be sympathetic towards them, but give them a gentle nudge. Gentle nudge, So you're quite right. What he had to say, especially in his audiences, his homilies are extraordinary, He had also quite a poetic pen. His prose was almost poetic at times, and he had this extraordinary gift of being able to capture in a few words very, very deep and profound thoughts. And so that so-called ordinary Catholics, simple faithful, they knew what he was talking about, and they were enriched by it. And likewise for the general public, his great 3 encyclicals, First one on love, When he produced the one on love, Deus Caritas, this really
Mhm.
surprised the world, because he had this terrible negative image as
Yep.
the enforcer of the faith, to quote one book's subtitle, or the God's Rottweiler, or the Panzer Cardinal. Suddenly he's talking about love, and he did so in such a wonderful way. It's a summary of much of his theology, in actual fact. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then the second one was on hope, how much we need hope today. And his analysis of hope, that I think is most beautifully written of all his three encyclicals, four actually. Yeah? And the third one then, which was published after he had abdicated under the name of Pope Francis, was on faith. Yeah? So the three theological virtues. He always managed to get to the core of the matter, to not be distracted by what's peripheral, or really to get to the core of things. Yeah. And so too, when he gave his speeches, he knew his audience always, as they say. And when he was actually, his major speeches to politicians, he addressed the United Nations in New York on the occasion of the 50th anniversary, 60th anniversary of the Human Rights Charter of Human Rights. Yeah? Gave a marvelous talk there. And then he gave a wonderful talk in Paris to the politicians and leaders of culture on the source of European civilization, being in the monastic monasteries of Benedict. Yeah? And then in Westminster Hall, he gave this extraordinary talk in a few yards away from St. Thomas More, was condemned to death for his conscience. And Ratzinger was a man who wrote wonderfully on what conscience is, inspired by Cardinal Newman. But that speech was, I remember Lord, what's his name, Patton, who organized his state visit to England. I happened to meet him at a dinner in Dublin on one occasion. I was introduced to him as Benedict's former student. Immediately he said that was one of the two most impressive, two best talks by any politician he's ever heard. The other was by Obama, by the way. He said Obama gave an extraordinary talk, Lord Patton, Kris Patton, when he was during his campaign to be president. Anyhow, he really stunned the members of Parliament, House of Commons, House of Lords. There were all the prime ministers were there. And then, of course, he went to Berlin, and in the Parliament there, he had this extraordinary address to the parliamentarians on the nature of justice, the role of conscience in society, and the need to recover, as he said, what we call the natural law, the instinct for goodness and truth that is deep in our hearts. So we live in a bunker at the moment, and we exclude the light, the light of God's illumination, and we live in artificial light that break open the bunker. He was telling the politicians, and look, God is the only one that actually can give you the right direction into the future. God and the moral law He has written into our beings. Yeah? So he spoke, to different people at different levels, and he could do it. And he also, of course, chose, as you rightly said, to speak during his Wednesday audiences mostly on the great saints of the church, right from the apostles, right through the whole 2,000 years, because that's one of his main convictions, that the two greatest apologies, ultimately the two most convincing apologies for the church, for the faith, for Christianity, are her saints and her art. So, and also, of course, they're not just apologies for the church. They are what inspires us to be Christian. Yeah. Ultimately, theology has its place, but nothing compares to the example of a great saint. Yeah. And all the saints are there, not only to intercede for us, that above all, but also to inspire us and to give us the courage to go on and to face the world with joy and peace, and to bring joy and peace into the world. So, as you said, he had this capacity to, speak to anyone whose mind was open, I would say, be they scholars, intellectuals, be they ordinary housewives or workers. He could speak to, be their children. But above all, as I said, his writings, which are so rich, they will be a source of inspiration for theologians for generations to come.
Yeah, there are many people have been asking me recently, well, where would I start? And depending on who they are, and generally, I think for anybody, Ignatius Press, I know, has been able to put, along with other publishers have done this, but Ignatius has done a nice job of putting those audiences.
Yes.
So that's a great doorway, and there was a series of audiences right towards the end in which they pretty much were called the School of Prayer, yes, where he entered into this great, how can I say it? His relationship with the Word was a relationship with the person of Christ.
Exactly.
And that's how he did his biblical scholarship. He didn't dissect it, and leave it like a cadaver on. And I say that again in all reverence. I'm not trying to, but there are people who will do scripture that way. But he didn't do that. He was so gentle because he was dealing with a living word, capital W, wasn't he?
Well, of course, that was really the subject of his postdoctoral thesis on Bonaventure, where he discovered that for Bonaventure, up to then, there was a tendency to see revelation in terms of statements of the truth, founded on scripture and tradition. The church's teaching and scripture are the unspoken tradition, unspoken word. And he discovered, of course, in the medieval theologians, especially Bonaventure, but also Thomas Aquinas, that actually revelation is person. So Jesus Christ and the sacrament, the scripture and tradition, they are our gateway. They mediate that encounter with the person, but they're not ends in themselves, and therefore they have to be treated precisely as that. So his great trilogy on Jesus of Nazareth, it describes that. Modern interpretation of scripture is very much based on the modern historical critical method, and he uses that because it has also brought a lot of insights into our reading of scripture. But it's not enough. And then he said we have to see it within the whole interpretation, how the church, above all her great thinkers, Irenaeus of Lyon, Athanasius, Augustine, Bonaventure, Thomas, how they have interpreted the scriptures down through the centuries. And then, of course, the questions that are raised by the modern world. But as you so beautifully put it, Kris, the scriptures and the word of God is not a dead thing. It is living, and is liberating when you see it in that way. And it also means that the study of scripture then, really will never end, because we can never plumb the depth of the word of God as expressed in scripture or tradition. So I think that when he went as a very young peritus expert with Cardinal Frings to Second Vatican Council, that when he almost failed his postdoctoral thesis.
I did not know that.
Yes, because he was contradicting the consensus at the time, and one of his examiners was an exponent of that consensus. So when he submitted, I think he wrote the postdoc in a very short time, perhaps 1 or 2 years. Doctoral thesis was written in 6 months, but and this is a big, thick volume. Now it's been published by in his collection of works, and he gave it to him. He submitted to the faculty. He waited. Then he was at a meeting one time of theologians, and he ran into his the second examiner said, by the way, you failed. Now, he had expected to pass, evidently, you know. If you do a superb doctoral thesis and you've got the support of your supervisor, as he had, with his own supervisor, then of course you're sure of it. And therefore, and he was so sure that he got his parents to sell their own house to live with him in the seminary outside Munich, Freising, and he was ready to start on his career. And all of a sudden, he would lose all of that. So he was devastated, but then he got the text back. That was, every second line was red, question mark, yeah. So and he was given it, his supervisor managed to persuade the faculty to allow him to resubmit. So he took it home. I said, what am I going to do now? And the man who rejected him said to himself, I suppose, there are so many corrections to be made, he will not be able to do it. Yeah. But Ratzinger noticed that 2/3 of the dissertation were actually marked with red biro all over the place. But the last third, which was on its own history of Revelation, that actually was untouched. So he siphoned off. And by the way, the typist who typed his doctoral thesis made so many typos, so many errors, it was embarrassing. So he's never actually taken anyone to task for typos in his life. But that also didn't help. So he siphoned off the first 2/3 and resubmitted the last third, which had to be accepted. And then he had to give a public lecture on the basis of his thesis as part of the postdoc process. And he gave his wonderful talk. And then his own supervisor, who was one of the examiners, and the examiner both got up and attacked each other. But anyhow,
wow.
What was at stake was he was rejecting the idea that revelation can be, as it were, confined to statements, dogmatic teaching, statements, you know. There's a person. And when he went to the council with Cardinal Frings, I think his most important contribution was probably to the Dei Verbum on Revelation, the decree, the Constitution on Revelation, was decree, is it? Where and that was highly fought about by the old school, put it that way, and Ratzinger and company, you know, to establish that it is actually a person revelation. And more than that, it's a person engaged in dialogue with humanity. And that you find in all his writings, but particularly in Introduction to Christianity, where he shows that God's revelation is not just revelation, it engages the human person to whom he has revealed himself. Yeah? Moses, the prophets, and they have to wrestle with him to understand God, you know, in his revelation. And therefore, the formulation of the truths of revelation in Scripture just took time, you know. And it's this wonderful cooperation between God and man, this dialogue between God and humanity, which actually marks revelation as well. It's not just a saying coming down from on high, this is what I'm revealing to you, you know, because he's revealing, as the prophet Hosea and the other prophets put it, a love of God for humanity, for fallen humanity. Yeah, and love, of course, ultimately can't be expressed in words. Yeah, it can be indicated but not expressed.
Well, Father, this has been just such a blessed time to be with you and to get to know even more deeply this incredible gift that the world was given in allowing Joseph Ratzinger to be in our midst and to allow him to teach us and to touch our lives and to touch yours. And now you as his good spiritual son, helping the rest of the world to know it too. I hope we get to talk more and more about, other aspects of his teachings. You know it so well.
I don't really, because that's interesting. The youngest, I would go to the younger students, because when we were as his doctoral students and postdoctoral students, we did our own thing. We did our own research. And he prompted us and helped us, but we were free, So when he became Pope in particular, a lot of my colleagues were very embarrassed because they knew so little about him. We didn't read him, We studied his lectures, of course, and seminars. It's not the same thing as having a really deep understanding. You probably have know more about him than I do, actually, from what you were saying, And I'm not flattering you.
I don't know about that. I was taught
Yes.
by.
No, but you've read so much, which is really wonderful. And I'd like to pay tribute to Ignatius Press.
Yes, please do.
We owe so much to Father Fessio and his wonderful staff. They're so deep. And they have made available to the English-speaking world, not just to in America, but throughout the world, the English-speaking world is indebted to Father Joe Fessio and Ignatius Press, especially for making Benedict's theology so accessible.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Father, we our hearts are united with yours.
Thank you.
We're sad, but we're also filled with hope and joy because I have to believe. He's now embraced truth fully.
Absolutely.
In the person of Christ. Father Twomey, thank you so very much.
Okay. God bless you and Happy New Year.
You too.
Thank you.
You've been watching a special In Conversation with Father Vincent Twomey discussing the life and legacy of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. To hear this podcast of our conversation, along with hundreds of other spiritual formation programs, visit discerninghearts.com, or you can find it within the free Discerning Hearts app or on your favorite podcast streaming platform. For more conversations like the one you just heard, be sure to subscribe to our Discerning Hearts YouTube channel. This has been a production of Discerning Hearts. I'm your host, Kris McGregor. We hope that if this has been helpful for you, that you will first pray for our mission, which is to offer authentic and rock-solid spiritual formation freely to souls around the world. And if you feel us worthy, please consider a charitable donation, which is fully tax-deductible, to help support our efforts. But most of all, we hope that you will tell a friend about discerninghearts.com.